Well, I've got the van back, but all's not well that ends well yet.
They retuned the whole thing, but it is still running mighty rough. Basically, they said it's something internal with the engine, something cylinder, pressure, head, something, I don't know. The guy said there's no guarantee, but he's pretty sure it won't blow up on me and might even get me home. So that's good news. Plus, they only charged me $100 because they ended up putting it all back together the way it was. Which leaves me with two options. One, I could just drive straight home and try to make it there. Or two, I could stop in some town and let them pull the entire van apart and rebuild the whole engine. Or actually, there's a third option. Three, I could just keep going and hope for the best. I think that's what I'm going to do. But before I take any long drives in any direction with this thing, I decided to take a short drive over here. I am standing on the edge of the vast Mark Twain Lake, so named because it surrounds the town of Florida, Missouri, which we're almost standing in now. The place where one Samuel Langhorne Clemens, after his parents made a long journey from Fentress County, Tennessee, was born in 1835. And over there, just behind the van, looking almost like some sort of mid-century modern Mormon church, is the Mark Twain Shrine, which contains the actual two-room house Mark Twain was born in. It's a place I've been to before years ago and even filmed, but never uploaded. So let's go check it out.
Oh my gosh, would you look at this? I remember this being a very quiet, very echoey place. There's only one lady working here, and my memories hold true. Feels awkward to talk in here. Mark Twain's father moved here at the behest of his in-laws, who were encouraging to come out and seize new opportunities in a new state. And they already had several children, 2 boys and 2 girls, I think. He said in his autobiography, "I was of a later vintage. I was postponed to Missouri. Missouri was an unknown new state and needed attractions." And boy, oh boy, has he given Missouri a lot of attractions. It's so small and so big at the same time. Imagine 6 people in this tiny house and then adding another baby. It's crazy to think that this is where he came into the world, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, and that he went from this tiny little structure where he was a notoriously sickly baby. Mark Twain even once asked his mother, "Were you afraid I wasn't going to live?" And she said, "No, afraid you was." And went on to become literally the most famous American in the world, with the possible exception of Ulysses Grant, for generation after generation. Later in life, he said, "Recently, someone in Missouri has sent me a picture of the house I was born in. Heretofore, I have always stated that it was a palace, but I shall be more guarded now." Yeah, dude, no kidding. Humble origins indeed. It's amazing that this house has been preserved, and this isn't the first structure that was built to house the house. Apparently, there was an older wooden one, but Clara Clemens, Mark Twain's only surviving daughter, helped them design this and approved this giant mid-century monstrosity to be its permanent home. And the cool thing is, it's not just the house that's in this room. There are, of course, lots of artifacts representative of the time on the Missouri frontier. Some lye, soap, and the like. But even more impressive are actual artifacts from Mark Twain's family. It makes a lot of sense that they would have some of Jane Clemens' stuff here. After all, she would remember the house much better than Mark Twain would have, especially since it was in this house, in basically the middle of nowhere, that she had to do all the hard work of giving birth to young Sammy. Look at that, there's her rocking chair from later when she lived in Keokuk, Iowa. And for all I know, that's her butter churn. Here's a whole display about the Quarles farm. John Quarles was Mark Twain's uncle and had a farm out here that heavily inspired his later work. Not only is it thought to be the model for the Phelps farm in Huckleberry Finn, but this is where he heard the stories from Dan Quarles, one of his uncle's slaves, that would influence him for the rest of his life and provide the model of the character Jim. I hate whispering, but it's too awkward not to. It's funny, during Mark Twain's early travels, he made fun of American relic hunters that would break splinters off of famous European buildings and stuff like that for souvenirs to take home. And I must say, standing here seeing all the splinters kind of makes me want to take one myself. No, resist. I wonder if that's what happened to all this siding here. It has little bits chipped off. If you know a lot about Mark Twain, which I do, it's pretty amazing to stand in here and soak this all in. I'm glad at least one thing is going right. But it's not just the cabin in this shrine. Time to move on because there's a whole museum in here that's actually got a lot of amazing artifacts considering its size. There are a lot of displays relating to his books, like this one about roughing it, with replicas of the hat he would have worn and the pistol he would have carried in the West. Different editions of his books, as you might imagine, in all kinds of languages from around the world. Here's a display all about the book Tom Sawyer, including a little case with all of the swag Tom got from making his friends pay for the privilege of painting Aunt Polly's fence. And biggest and best of all, in this room, look at this. A gargantuan replica pilot house from Life on the Mississippi. Ooh, look at all the steamboat paraphernalia over here. And if you're willing to ever so gingerly climb up aboard, you can get behind the massive wheel, like the ones Mark Twain would have had to use piloting those steamboats. Look at the size of this thing. And should I pull it? It's the whistle. Oh man, it doesn't work. Darn, I was gonna give a blast that those old ladies working here would never forget. Look at this, here's some of Mark Twain's inventions. He had a memory builder game, a self-pasting scrapbook, and this is interesting. Here's a report that he wrote up to remark unfavorably on the workings of the first private telephone in the world that ran to his Hartford, Connecticut house. Speaking of Hartford, Connecticut and Mark Twain, by the way, there are many, and I mean many, many, many artifacts from Mark Twain's actual house. You see, his only surviving adult daughter, Clara, at some point held an auction at her Hollywood home, and some people from out here in Missouri attended the auction and bought as much as they could for the Mark Twain shrine. Look at this. This piece was purchased in Venice, Italy, specifically for their Hartford house. That house, which is a museum now, must be pretty jealous that so many of the original pieces are here in Missouri. But since we have no idea what kind of furniture was in that little 2-room house, you know, the Birthplace house, this sort of makes up for it. Here's a chair from Mark Twain's last house. Just think about it. Mark Twain's rump could have sat on that thing. And here's a painting of Clara Clemens from her house. I know that she came here. I'm not sure what all she donated to this place, but some of the items for sure. Like this carriage that was actually Sam Clemens from his Hartford house in Connecticut. Mark Twain, one of the most famous authors in the world and certainly the most famous American author of that time, sat right inside that carriage. Wow, I bet it was almost as bumpy riding around in this thing as it is to ride around in the van right now. Look at this. Here are proof sheets from the publishing of Tom Sawyer. And here are actual manuscript pages. Holy cow, this is something incredible to look at. I've read this book 1,000 times. Look at this. They even have the original contract with the publisher. This is interesting. Mark Twain and the houses he knew. There's the Birthplace house, the boyhood home in Hannibal we were just at. There's a cabin in Aurora, Nevada. His in-laws' house, his first house after his marriage, his big Hartford house. There's a lot you can learn in here. What the heck? I wasn't expecting the restroom to be in the basement, but I guess you have to have somewhere to hide from tornadoes. That's better. Man, this is all amazing. Part of me wishes it could be in the Boyhood Home Museum, but then again, gave me an excuse to get out of Hannibal today. All right, one last look at the birthplace, and then we'll head back to the birthplace of something else back in Hannibal. Oh, man. This is an awesome place to visit, but I must tell you, it feels good to be back out in the sunshine
where I can speak at full volume again. Not that there's really any need to speak at full volume, because it's awfully quiet out here. Florida, Missouri is very tiny. I think it has a total population at the moment of 8 or 9 residents. That's why I'm really hoping nothing happens to the van while we're out here, because this is the big town around these parts. They definitely picked a cool place for the shrine right here on the shores of the Mark Twain Lake. But they almost could have just built the shrine right in the town of Florida, right where the house originally stood. Because, and admittedly, it's been a few years, but if I remember correctly, there was not much there. You are now looking at historic downtown Florida, where there are more buzzards flying around in the air than people living in the town. And right behind the van here, this is where Sam Clemens was born. Over the ditch. I like how there used to be a sidewalk here. Apparently this is where that statue used to be, the one that we saw in the shrine. And it was later moved indoors I think for obvious reasons. Not a lot going on down here. It's back up on someone's private property, but if you look this way, you'll see this double log cabin building. See it back there in between the two houses that are painted? I believe there's a picture of that building in the museum, and somebody was passing around that picture claiming it was Mark Twain's birthplace. Little mistaken identity while he was alive, but he looked at the picture and said, no, that one's much more luxurious than the house where I was born. Maybe it explains the buzzards, but there's more dead people in Florida than living ones. And in fact, when Mark Twain's family left here, the Clemens family, they actually left one Clemens behind. Mark Twain's sister, Margaret, is somewhere out here in this cemetery, along with some of his other relatives, actually, I believe. The only other time I was ever out here was in a lightning storm with my good friend Tyler Evans, and we were running around here looking for her grave. In the freezing cold rain, the grass was like waist high, and when I left, there were ticks all over me. It was super gross. As you can see, it's not easy to find anyone out here, and half the headstones are more than half buried in the ground. This is one of those things where I'm not going to find it again until the last second before I feel like I have to turn back. Wow, there's a lot of little headstones over here. Many of them say unknown on them. And there's a little sign that says Bryant Cemetery, so this might have been another cemetery moved when they filled in the lake, I'm guessing. The search is not going well. Look at all of these people. You have to assume some of them were just wonderful people to be around. Others could have been gossips or grumps or rascals. There's just no way to know now, is there? You know what? I am 100% sure it was not over here. I believe it's back closer to the van. Oh, here she is. Mark Twain's older sister, who passed away in Florida, Missouri, and never made the trip to Hannibal. Sacred to the memory of Margaret Clemens, who died August, 13th, 15th, 1839. Wow. In the 10th year of her age. Man, gone too soon. Maggie Clemens. Still here. And so, actually, is Mark Twain's uncle somewhere, John Quarles. I believe that's his headstone right there. Oh, yes. Here he is, John A. Quarles. Wow, there's his tombstone. And right next to him, Martha Ann, his wife. Crazy. I think they were the models for the Phelps family in Huckleberry Finn, if I'm not misremembering that at the end of the book. He was a slave owner. He did liberate his slave, Dan, Uncle Dan'l, as they called him back then, who, like I said before, is figured to be the model of the character Jim, at least according to Mark Twain, and was a great storyteller, apparently, who ignited Sam Clemens' love of story. And the Quarles children, the slave ones that is, played with Sam Clemens pretty much as equal as they could, and are figured to be by scholars now maybe the earliest seed that blossomed into his completely rejecting slavery and racism later in his life. So it's a pretty wild place to be. Less wild than last time, though. At least they mowed the grass. All right, well, we've seen everything that we could possibly see in Florida, Missouri. Now let's see if the van will make it back to Hannibal. The van has a new trick now where, in addition to running rough, this window will no longer roll down or up. One more thing to get fixed, I guess. Well, what a fun one. I was talking to it this morning sternly with Julio, and I was saying, hey, if you betray me, you're going to be known as the USS Traitor. But maybe we're in town just because you wanted me to see a little more Mark Twain action. So if you make it all the way back home, I'll name you the Mark Twain, which is what everybody wanted me to name it anyways. But if you don't, you're forever branded the USS Traitor. Oh boy, off we go. Man, if there are any ace mechanics in the United States who are willing to pop this baby apart, work on it all night, and you've got a shop out there somewhere that can handle it, I'd almost be willing to say I'd drive straight to you. Someone would have to tell Allie, I guess. That's my dream. My dream is I roll into town and someone's like, Justin, I've been waiting for you in the van. Here, let's work on it. I'd head home, but my uncle's got cancer. And not just like a little bit. Like, he's got a lot of bit of cancer that he's fighting off with both fists, like I said. So I really want to make it to his house. It's pretty important to me. So I'm going to keep trying. You know, speaking of Mark Twain's uncle's farm, I am pretty sure we're looking at it. And I think back there is the building that local archaeologist, I think her name is Karen Hunt, hope I'm not getting that wrong, has had a bunch of people out there working, doing archaeology, and rebuilding the Quarles farmhouse. It's all private property. I don't want to cruise back there without permission, but I really hope one day to get an invite. I'm not 100% sure this is it, but I'm pretty darn sure, just operating from memory, it is the only red and white building here, which is the marker whenever they have volunteers go out there to do archaeology. I've read a lot of articles about it. Never been back there. Would dearly, dearly like to go. It's beautiful countryside, and no wonder Sam Clemens enjoyed spending his boyhood summers out here, but at the same time, I'm like, holy cow, this was slave land? Like there were slaves working here? That's terrible. It's hard to wrap your head around how such horrible things could happen in such a beautiful spot. And honestly, even though it seems like it was a long time ago, just how recent all of that stuff really was. All right, no more fooling around. Next stop, Hannibal. You guys don't even know. There's a little black jumping spider in here. This is supposed to be a no spider zone. I'm gonna have to go buy some spray later at Walmart. It's not like I got bad news or anything today, but it is more disappointing than getting good news, you know? We're just maintaining the status quo, which I guess isn't all that bad. And we did make it back to Hannibal, and there is an hour and a half left until the Mark Twain Boyhood Home and Museum closes. So I think I'm gonna head up to the room and grab my little ticket and head back in there just for a little bit, you know, because when in Rome. Darn van, wish I'd bought a Chevy, because then my Chevy would be at the levee. Yeah. Anyways, I'll catch up with you guys in the evening. Not gonna lie, that felt good. I feel like I washed off a little negativity. It's hotter than the dickens out there. It literally feels like Florida in the summertime out there. Pretty warm. Wouldn't you say so, Sam?
I was born in the almost invisible village of Florida, Missouri.
Yeah, we know. We were just there.
My parents removed to Missouri in the early 30s. I do not remember just when, for I was not born then and cared nothing for such things.
But how's the width?
The village contained 100 people, and I increased the population by 1%. It is more than many of the best men in history could have done for a town.
Okay.
There's no record of a person doing as much, not even Shakespeare. But I did it for Florida. And it shows I could have done it for any place. Even London, I suppose.
But Sam, the weather, I was trying to tell him about the weather.
Yes, the weather is bad. And if I were dealing in weather, it is not the brand that I'd put up in cans for future use. No, it is the kind of weather I'd throw on the market and let it go for what it would fetch. And if it wouldn't sell for anything, I would hunt up some lifelong enemy and present it to him. Failing in this, as a last resort, I should probably take it out on the big bridge, dump it into the Mississippi, and start it to Europe via the jetties. I'd unload it some way, and that quickly, too.
Boy, when Mark Twain answers, he answers. Well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little stressed out, a wee bit, about the condition of the van, a little worried. More so, really, with the condition of the trip. I'd like the trip to stay in good condition. But I've learned now from many years of experience that when one thing ends, another thing often begins. So I'm trying not to stress out about it too much. Some of you are no doubt familiar, but others of you undoubtedly are less so, that video making wasn't always in my line of trade. I was once married to someone who hated me and was desperately trying to solve that dilemma, and had a failing music career that we tried to revive with one final foolhardy attempt to go on a US tour again, but the van would not cooperate. The record label owner would not cooperate, and both proved untrustworthy and left us right here, literally right here, along the shores of the Mississippi River. And this, my friends, where my music career ended, where symbolically at least my marriage began to end, which is a long story, but we'll save that for the book, is where Randomland was born. Well, not technically born, it was born at Disneyland in Anaheim, but this is the exact place where it was conceived, and it was gazing out over this exact spot at pretty much this exact time of day towards the far eastern shore that was not to be, wondering what I was going to do if my band and my marriage proved to fail. But I started thinking of other things I'd really like to try, or what else I'd really like to work on, and that was the seed that fertilized the idea that then became Randomland. It is hardly exaggerating to say that my entire identity was wrapped up in the things that were coming to an end, or at least that I realized were coming to an end, as I stood alongside the banks of the Mississippi River 10 years ago, and now literally a decade after that first seed was planted, I have a whole completely different life, a different lady, a different career, a different family and friends. The last 10 years of my life have been so much more rewarding, fulfilling, and happier than the previous 10. It's like they were two different lives, two different people entirely. And that's why I so strongly believe that people can change and can change so much that you can almost become a completely different person, that the mistakes of the past can be, if not erased, then overcome. Well, at least in most cases. That's why I try to have as much mercy and forgiveness as I can for people, because I always think, you know what, maybe they're just on the wrong stage of their journey right now. You know, they haven't hit that stride. They haven't reached their metaphorical Hannibal and Mississippi River and been unable to cross over and had to turn back and try something else, try another way, you know. So I try to meet people where they're at and think there's still a lot of room for grace and forgiveness and mercy, something that was extremely hard to learn to give to myself. But this is where it all began, literally right down here where these rocks end and turn into the grass, where the old docks used to be. So sure, I'm a little stressed out, I'm a little worried about the van, but I've been here with a broken van before and had to turn back or change my plans before, and it only worked out, well, eventually, for the better. You know, that tour was a complete and utter disaster, a total failure. But as I look back over 10 years now on that journey, and the people that were with me and the time that we had failing together, helps remind me that although our destination was failure, the journey was something memorable, something I'll never forget. And it was really just the beginning, just the opening of the door that led to other things. So remember, guys, failure is not always the end. It's always worth sticking around, turning the page, and seeing what's in the next chapter. My best friend Al, that I just saw in Kansas's mom, used to say, "Don't cry till you know you're hurt." And we don't know that this journey has failed yet. Still gonna give it a try, crossing the mighty Mississippi River tomorrow and heading east towards my uncle. And whether that van makes it down the road and all the way back to California or not, we'll still be cruising on the quest for positivity. And either way, there'll be more adventures to come. For now, though, I think I've wandered around enough today, out in the crazy heat and 90-degree weather. Shout out to those of you who are on Patreon who made all this possible, and there's a bunch of extra stuff coming your way, particularly if you're in the Adventurers Club. Allie, who's still at home shipping out all that merch, would kill me if I did not remind you that we do have an online store, store.randomland.com, with sick hats and shirts and other merch. And now, my friends, as the sun moves along westward towards my home in California and begins to sink over that far horizon, I think I've done my duty. It's time to motel and sleep well. See you next time.
Oh my goodness, it's the celebrated jumping frog.